All right. Well, I guess we're live now, so we can start talking about some 9/11 conspiracies. Um,
Uh-huh.
is there anywhere that you want to start out? Like any
Well,
spot you want to start on?
I think that the most interesting place to start is just like people's initial observations of the event. So you have like three or four options essentially. You have the people who see it and then watch the news and believe the initial story. You have the people who see it, have questions, but they aren't interested enough to ask them. You have the people who ask those questions after seeing there's some discrepancies, and then they dive into it and have really, really strong beliefs about what actually happened. So you have the people who think that there weren't airplanes, or you have the people that think there were bombs in the building and stuff like that. And then the
Mm-hmm.
fourth group of people is the people who see the news, see the event, have a lot of questions, dive into it, and then still can't figure it out. And that's essentially where I'm at. But I
Yeah.
still like looking into each individual aspect of what could have went wrong. Was it a cover up? Was it just
Yeah.
natural inconsistencies, things like that?
Right. Yeah. I think after just doing more research on this too, I kind of came to that too. It almost seemed like no one really knows what happened. Like the 9/11 Commission report, there were a lot of statements. Let me try to find one right now. But they took samples of like perimeter columns, but they only took like 1% and 3% of the core columns of these buildings, and then the outside columns of these buildings. And then they say,
Mm-hmm.
well, we didn't take enough evidence to really give us a good picture of what actually happened. So it sounds like the research that the 9/11 Commission report and NIST did. A lot of the times, their data just seems like there's not enough data at all. So it's
Yeah,
almost like they're just coming up with their own theories of what might have happened. It seems like they don't even know necessarily how the towers fell, like scientifically, like how did these things happen? A lot of times, just feel like
yeah.
we don't. I don't know. Feel like we don't know.
And what I kind of wrestle with the entire 9/11 Commission report is there's a lot of conflicts of interest of like responsibilities for what actually happened that day.
Mm-hmm.
And those people were also on the investigation team going into it. So it's like, was
Yeah.
it just that they were incompetent in finding this information? Were they generally just not presented the information? Or did they have an interest in not presenting what
Right.
actually happened?
Right.
Because I've seen, and I think we can probably put in videos, um, even if it's just without audio at the end, of family members of firefighters, people that were living in or working in the buildings, and police officer family members who passed away
Yeah.
at the 9/11 Commission reports, screaming at the reporters
Yeah.
or the people who are on the panel to answer their questions,
Right.
because it was basically like the people who were asking the questions were giving them softballs,
Mm-hmm. I
questions
think.
that they already knew the answer to, questions that were really inconsequential at the end of the day. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think there were. I think I remember you sent me a few of those videos, and I just remember there were like firemen who, they had all this asbestos. They were both
Uh-huh.
those buildings had so much asbestos in them. I think it was almost like
Yeah.
300 to 400 tons, and you know that just covered up the whole, like all of New York City, and all those firemen who were running through those buildings and on ground zero, and even those like everyone involved in the situation.
Well, even
they're
afterwards during the cleanup.
they're getting like, weren't they getting like mesothelioma and these cancers and stuff like
Yep.
that? Yeah, and it's like, okay, I guess that's one thing we could start talking about, was just these buildings in general. They had so many strange, they were bought 2 months before 9/11,
Uh-huh.
like, I guess let's
You know, the
start there.
insurance policies.
Right, yeah, so
Yep.
I guess we could start there with Larry Silverstein, who he already owned Building 7, and we know Building 7. Shoot, my microphone just fell. We already know Building 7 came down for whatever reason. Um,
Yeah.
and he bought a 99-year lease, looks like 4 months before the attack. and he bought it from the Port Authority, they were in like a 10-year court battle with insurance companies over this asbestos removal. The documentary that I was watching, they said that it was like an estimated $1 billion just to remove asbestos. So I don't know, man. I mean, like, the Port Authority, they originally owned these towers, right? And they don't want to pay. They had already done a few floors of asbestos removal, and they had done like just a few like tile removal, not even necessarily like insulation, just vinyl tiles that had asbestos in them. And some of those jobs were costing them literally like $500,000 to $1 million. So they had gotten their feet wet in this, and obviously they didn't want to continue with it. So they sold the towers to Larry Silverstein, and then, as we know, 4 months later they came down. I think the weirdest fact about that whole situation was Larry Silverstein. He worked I can't remember which tower. I think it was the North Tower. But he worked near the top of it too. And on the day of 9/11, he is supposed to have a meeting at a restaurant in one of the towers. And his wife says, "Nope, you have a dermatologist meeting. You meet with your dermatologist, you can't go. Like, this is just not." And he had a scheduled meeting, and his wife told him no, apparently. So, fortunately for...
Must be a really smart woman.
Fortunately for Mr. Larry Silverstein, he not only escaped, his death, he could have died. And he owned those towers, right? But he ended up getting, how much was it? He wanted $7 billion.
7 point... Yeah.
I saw that you, why don't you talk about that a bit more? I saw that you put some notes in on that.
Well, first of all, the thing that just kind of gets me is Larry Silverstein was already a successful businessman.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the world would you buy such a liability? Because they did disclose that one of the problems that the Port Authority was having in that court case that we were talking about was the asbestos.
Right.
And there's no way that someone who's that successful, in my mind, would have taken on a liability without a plan to get rid of it.
Exactly.
And 4 months in, there was no additional work being done to remove the asbestos.
Yeah.
So I think that brings up the question of not questioning his integrity in a certain way, but was his plan really to demolish the buildings in whatever way, or to allow it to happen so that he wouldn't have to pay for the asbestos and would get the insurance payout afterwards? Because one thing that I found really interesting about him was he specifically stated that there were 2 different terrorist attacks, one on one tower and another on the other, just so he could get more money.
Yeah, that was, I think when you look for motives in all of these situations, you have to look for motives, right? That's what we're trying to figure out is like, why are these people planning these things? Why would they be doing anything? And I feel like money has to be the number one reason most of the time. And I don't know, that right there, he was supposed to get, 3.5? I think the policy was 3.5 to start. And then he said, well, there's 2 separate attacks. One tower got hit by one plane. The second tower got hit by the second plane. It's 2 different instances. So I should get double the money, which is just, it's ridiculous when you think about it. Like, there's thousands of people that have died from this. And then, I mean, it's just ignorant. Obviously, these 2 attacks they're planned. Like, when 2 things like that happen within, 20 minutes of each other, they're not coincidental. Like, obviously, somebody down the line planned for both of these planes to enter both of these towers. So the fact that he wanted to just get more money out of it by saying just 2 different, that's just ridiculous to me.
Yeah, well, just going back to his original thing of buying it, knowing that there's an asbestos problem, and then whether it was just based on luck or it's something he knew, the buildings collapsed, there's no more asbestos problem. Essentially what that is you taking your entire bank account, dumping it into a stock blindly, or when you're drunk, and then waking up 4 months later, and it's now doubled in value, and the lawsuit that was against the company that you just bought stock in is gone.
That is a really good point, too. Like, you mentioned before, he was a very successful man before this, and you're not dumb people don't get billions of dollars, right? So he's not gonna go into this situation without almost 100% certainty that he's gonna come out on top, right? It seems so foolish, and I'm sure when he bought those towers, I'm sure that was the majority of his net worth, billions of dollars put into those towers. But I don't know. It seems like obviously he knew something was gonna happen that would allow him to come out with a brand new tower. I think it's crazy too. There's a lot of videos of him talking, and when he's talking about building this other tower, he always mentions my three towers, and it's like so. It's just so
very possessive.
Oh, it's just I don't know. It's just creepy almost. Like he's taking. I mean, maybe he just took advantage of this situation, right? I mean, I don't really know. It doesn't seem like he just willy-nilly put himself in that situation and somehow this happened. And now he's doing TV interviews or, obviously this was a long time ago, but it's weird that, somebody of that nature would risk so much for, I don't know. It's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, in addition to him not being at the towers that day, another interesting aspect of it is the fact that his kids also worked at the towers. And I believe
really?
The story behind them is that they slept in, both of them. It was two kids. And they slept in that day. It's pretty controversial, but I kind of want to get off of him for a second and just move on. There were two other people that I was just kind of looking up some inconsistencies or really surprising facts about it.
Yeah.
And I found that Michael Jackson actually had a meeting in the towers that day too, and he also slept in.
Really?
Unrelated to the towers per se, but Mark Wahlberg was actually scheduled to be on Flight 11. I think that was an American Airlines flight.
I think I remember hearing something about that, yeah.
Yep, and he chose to personally charter a different plane.
See, I don't... okay, so that's the other thing, right? I have some notes here. I think the Secretary of Defense, a few months before these attacks, the FBI was like, hey, you got to start flying private charter. We don't want you on public planes anymore because obviously somebody had some information on, these things might be happening. That is crazy. Michael Jackson had a meeting. You say Mark Wahlberg or Mark Cuban?
Mark Wahlberg, yeah.
Interesting.
But what I am just confused about at those points is there's no way that Michael Jackson would have known not to go there.
Exactly.
Because
so
you can't, if it is a conspiracy, there's only a certain amount of people who can be in on it before it just gets blown up.
Exactly.
And I think if Larry Silverstein and his wife or whoever, maybe not even his wife, I think that might just be a cover story for why he wasn't there.
Right.
But if he knew about it, and a few more powerful people, maybe Rudy Giuliani, Donald Rumsfeld, George Bush, some higher level members of the CIA, FBI knew about it, that would make sense because they would have such a small, high level group that they couldn't take each other down.
Right.
But when you start getting into people who are still fairly influential, like actors and musicians, you're just getting a little bit too outside the sphere of influence. So in those cases, I'm more inclined to think, at least in the case of Michael Jackson, probably just an accident. He slept in, maybe. He took too many drugs the night before and just couldn't wake up.
Yeah.
But Mark Wahlberg, that's a little bit different for me because you have to get pretty lucky to have one of the only planes that's going to crash in United States history. And it happens, but generally not on commercial airliners.
Yeah.
And you personally choose to charter a new one. So I don't really have anything more on that. It's just something to keep in your mind.
Right.
There's either a lot of people getting lucky here or something's going on and they knew about it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing, right, is you can read into so many different facts. Like, there's a lot, the documentary that I was watching, there were a lot of times where I was like, that is super interesting, and it seems like it could be such a coincidence. But there's a fine line between people who who read information like that and they just run with it, right? They're like, they just believe it, Michael Jackson. If they hear that about Michael Jackson, I've heard tons of other random dumb conspiracies about Michael Jackson. Obviously, if they believe one, they're gonna believe the other ones, right? They're just gonna be.
Yep.
When you're more inclined to believe something like that, you're at some point you're just gonna believe everything, and it almost like it devalues it, right? Like you hear people, the major people that are talking about 9/11. I don't even know the big like I. Do you even consider Alex Jones no one really talks about 9/11 anymore, right? Like
yeah, no one talks about it unless it's really that day.
Yeah, right. And it's like I don't know. If you talk about this, it's almost like you're immediately just devalued. And I feel like that's a just common theme with all conspiracy theories. Like
I think there's also like a time delta on the conspiracy theory where you have a chance to really wake people up and make them care and change the narrative, and then after that point it's just like, hey buddy, are you obsessed with this and you need to just stop talking about it? Or like, what's going on with you talking about this for 10, 15, 20 years afterwards as though it happened yesterday?
Right. Well, and then you also, like, you get to some conspiracies, and I guess most of them are like that. You get to the end of it, and you're like, so what? Like, you could be 100% correct. 9/11 could be a total inside government job. But at the end of the day, so what? What is it really? It doesn't change anything. No one's in jail. These people are still dead. There's thousands of people that are still dead. The systems that came out of 9/11, like all of the policies or whatnot, like national security, we went to Afghanistan, like that's all done, right? It's already all happened. And it seems like it's just going to continue. Like there's nothing you can really do at like an individual level to really change anything. And it's kind of like, it's almost sad, right? I don't know.
It's pretty frustrating because it's like, well, what are we going to do? Go march together and protest in front of a government building and yell at it? Like, is that really going to do too much? There's some things that you could do, but it's just like you can't do those things.
And I feel like that's even worse, right? Like you become like, people will like ostracize you like you're a QAnon, or you went like you're a January 6th riot, or like if you gather with a bunch of people and you have these kind of conspiracy theories, people are just gonna label you as like an outsider. Yeah,
and the other thing is you're gathering with a lot of people. And if you're like, let's just say, for argument's purposes, the government did it, knew about it, or anything like that, and then needed to cover it up. If you're in a large group of people, do you not think that they would place people in there who are going to rile everyone up, discredit the entire group, and they probably wouldn't even believe it? They could be an FBI informant, they could be a government worker who has reason to shut this down, and then that entire group is discredited. So it's almost like that's the worst possible option, is to go into a group, because like, say January 6th, some people think it was all natural. Some people think that people were fired up by Trump. Other people think that there were people in the crowd that fired everyone up. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because now that entire group is discredited. Whatever they were concerned about doesn't matter anymore. They lost all their power and influence.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have to do it all so well and so quickly. That it's impossible, because what was really trying to be stopped? Was it trying to raise awareness for the fact that all of these people died for no reason? The firefighters and everyone involved in the cleanup died for no reason? Or could it also have been, hey, let's not go to Afghanistan or Iraq to fight for essentially freedom, is what they told? Or we're fighting against weapons of mass destruction that we now know didn't exist. So you have like maybe like a year to get everyone on the same page so you can shut all that down. It's almost impossible. But I still think at the end of the day, it's more interesting and empowering to know, or at least know, that there isn't higher truth to what's been told as the true story.
Yeah, and I think that's what most people are trying to figure out when they like talk about and research conspiracy theories. It's like people want to know the truth, right? And people want to know that about everything. We just want to know the truth. And I feel like when it comes to things like this, people really feel like they have an edge on everyone else when you know a conspiracy and you're right about it, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're Alex Jones and you know about Bohemian Grove and you actually get in and you're like, hey, something's weird here and I'm the first one to know about it. Well, that's where you know people are going to follow your conspiracy. Like you can make money off
Yeah.
of that too, right? And people just gravitate towards that when you find some information that's new and it's contrary to what like the popular narrative is. People, there's a certain type of people that follow that, and it's interesting. I think when we said it before, but when you follow one conspiracy, it's really easy to just get into more and more. But yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think one of the best reasons to actually understand these conspiracies, and one thing that I kind of want to get out before we go any further, is the fact that the word conspiracy theory was created for people who questioned the John F. Kennedy assassination by the CIA, so that
Interesting.
during
Okay.
the court case about it, they could discredit anyone in the future as a conspiracy theorist. So now there is a little bit of a negative connotation to the
Yeah,
word conspiracy
I was just gonna
theorist.
say.
Well, at the end of the day, yeah. Well, at the end of the day, what does that really mean? It
Right.
just means you're questioning the mainstream narrative about it, which
Yeah.
isn't bad at all.
That is so.
Yeah.
There is a huge negative connotation just with conspiracy theory. I mean, both conspiracy, like, you hear that if you type it in almost any news source, and it's going to almost be an article discrediting the conspiracy theory, right? You're never going to
Yep.
research conspiracy theories, and popular articles are going to support those theories. It's almost always there's these crazy people, and this is what they believe. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the ultimate benefit to understanding some of these conspiracy theories is you don't have to be so angry about polarizing issues in the government. Because nowadays people are either really hard right wing or really hard left wing.
Right.
And whenever their team doesn't win,
Yeah, it's
they're so
all hell
angry
breaks
about
loose.
it.
Yeah.
But now that I understand certain things and have a little bit less trust in the government,
Yeah.
I see both sides of the political sphere as two wings on the same bird.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's that same bird flying. You're just looking at one wing or the other wing.
Very
and now
true.
that I see the entire bird, then I don't have to be as angry, as frustrated.
Uh-huh.
I just keep going about my day, living my own life,
Mm-hmm.
which is more empowering than having the TV or your political interest
Yeah.
or some person that you've never met in real life but talks really nice on a podium fire you up or make you sad or anything like that.
Mhm.
You don't have to believe that stuff anymore. But I kind of like to get into a little bit more of, now that we've kind of established that there's something a little bit fishy going along with the building and why it needed to be demolished.
Yeah.
How did it fall? Like, do you think that it was airplanes and the jet fuel
Yeah.
that made it fall?
Yeah.
Or what do you think?
So, right, this is where it's like, man, I gotta have a PhD in physics, and I gotta start analyzing blast patterns of building walls, and so it's almost like I guess I can give you my best, estimate of what I think happened, but what I know, but I guess I guess I don't know, right? I guess the theory that the official report that we've been told is these planes entered the buildings and the jet fuel, it didn't melt the steel beams, but it weakened them enough to bend them and then pull the outer column supports, and it would break them and fall in, right? And then the building kind of caved in and fell on itself, right? That's
Yeah.
what we were kind of officially told, right? I guess you could say that's somewhat the official report.
Uh-huh.
But then you have reports from NIST, and NIST is the National Institute and Standards of Technology, right? And they ran all these simulations on the buildings, and they did like temperature radar checks or whatever you want to call it. They just scanned these buildings just to see how hot everything was. And all of those scans came back below 1,000 degrees. I think they were all under 500 degrees Fahrenheit, which isn't even enough to weaken steel beams, I don't think. So it's strange. And then you also get this report. I'm going to find this quote that I have. Here we go. Of more than the 170 areas examined on the 16 perimeter columns, only 3 columns had evidence that the steel reached temperatures over 480 degrees. That was straight from NIST. Like, I pulled that from their document yesterday, the damage and failures report. Like, they said it themselves. They only had 3 columns that even reached over 480. And later they go on to say that they didn't even have enough samples of steel beams to give a good answer of whether or not they were melted down. So I don't know. I guess then you kind of have to lead to the theories of, well, was it a controlled demolition? It's also strange because the majority of support in these towers was in the core. And I don't know, there's a lot of, they had elevator shaft, they had a whole new system put in a few months before. I guess it was the largest and most modern elevator system in the world at that time, and it was put in a few months beforehand. So some people theorize that, well, I guess a lot of people had access to those elevator shafts, which also supported 60% of the buildings. People could have been in and out there placing charges and bombs with, no suspicion. So that's a huge, that's probably the most, I don't know, I hear about that one the most, but I guess I don't know.
Yeah.
After going through all of this, I became more confused, honestly. That's how I came out of it. How about you? What do you think would happen?
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of different opinions throughout the years, and the thing that's so frustrating to me is there's a lot of people who don't believe in the official narrative, but have such conflicting stories. And I recently saw a video, this most recent 9/11 2022, and it was refuting it was someone who didn't believe in the official story, but refuted almost every of the most popular conspiracy claims about it. And one thing that I found most interesting was the fact that if they were placing charges and bombs, there couldn't have been any cell phone activity while that was going on, because it could have easily automatically set off the bombs prematurely if their plan was to set them off that day. Like, what do you say? A certain amount of time after the airplane hits and make it seem like that's what happened.
Yeah.
But what really doesn't sit well with me is the fact that the mainstream story is essentially that the jet fuel burned so hot that the towers just collapsed in on themselves in a free fall.
Yeah.
And one thing that I found interesting was, in researching other buildings that collapsed due to fire, none of them collapsed in on themselves. They never collapsed in their own shadow. They always collapsed to one side or the other, or one part of the building collapsed and the other stayed up, things like that. It was never just all at the same time.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've heard interesting, and we can get into the video that I sent you, but Nikola Tesla in the early 1900s was actually talking about how he could bring down a bridge in a matter of 12 seconds by finding its frequency. And essentially what he was implying was he could use a directed energy weapon to bring down a building based on its frequency without any bombs, any fires, or anything like that. And because the building collapsed most buildings, in terms of physics, that collapse, they collapsed in a certain amount of time that is easily calculable.
Yeah.
And this building didn't follow those equations when it collapsed. So that makes me think that something else is going up. So I'm not saying that this is the true story.
Yeah.
But right now, it's just the most interesting, out there, and compelling one for me is that somehow the frequency of the building was found and brought down, which coincides with the fact that it was a plan to bring it down in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think, as interesting and out there as it might sound, I think the airplanes might have been a distraction from that, because most people don't think about it. They're not physicists, they're not architects, they're not engineers. They'll see this and they'll be like, oh, well, I mean, it makes sense. You know, the jet fuel really boosted up the heat of the flames, weakened the structure of the building, and it collapsed in on itself.
Yeah.
But one reason why I'm more interested in the directed energy weapon and frequency claim is because Donald Trump, his uncle, was actually in Nikola Tesla's room first after he passed away. It was a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
And he got to see all of the information that Tesla had. And the only reason that I'm even connecting these dots, other than the sheer fact that it's Trump, he's powerful, he's popular,
Yeah.
and his uncle happened to be the one who was in the most famous and effective scientist ever's room first,
Yeah.
who had this technology, is the way that he reacted after the event. Because you would think, like, hey, my building's close, Larry Silverstein was his friend. Larry Silverstein's my friend.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of New York people here that passed away, are still in danger, things like that. You would think he would be somber, sad, upset, along those lines. His interviews afterwards, you'll never guess what one of the first things that he says in them is.
What's
he
that?
says, those buildings used to be the tallest in New York City. Now mine is. Essentially, not those words, but that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
So if you want to play that video and skip to like 142,
yeah.
I think it might be interesting to just get into that. I'll let you know when to stop or just whenever you think. But I'm pretty much just looking for his initial response to the question.
Okay, so it starts at 142. How long do you think I should play? Because you won't be able to hear me.
I'll pull it up too.
Okay.
So I can hear it a little bit.
It's a pretty tough situation.
Donald, you have one of the landmark buildings down in the financial district, 40 Wall Street. Did you have any damage, or did you know what's happened down there?
Well, it was an amazing phone call I made. 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan.
Oh my God!
And it was actually, before the World Trade Center, was the tallest. And then when they built the World Trade Center, it became known as the second tallest, and now it's the tallest. And I just spoke to my people, and they said it's the most unbelievable sight. It's probably 7 or 8 blocks away from the World Trade Center, and yet Wall Street is littered with 2 feet of stone and brick and mortar and steel. And there are thousands of people walking over the debris over the Brooklyn Bridge, where they're sending them out over the Brooklyn Bridge to Brooklyn, and then I guess they're going to have to figure out how to get home from there.
Yeah, I'd say about
they have between 1 foot and 2 feet of debris right in front of a building that's probably, you would say, Alan, 6 or 7 blocks away.
Donald, this is Roland Smith.
Hi, Roland.
You know, how you doing on this kind of day? You know, at some point we're going to put all this behind us, and you, as a visionary, particularly in New York real estate, what do you think that we ought to do as a city, as a people, when all of this when the mourning stops, when the dead are honored, and we've found out what caused it and maybe corrected it? What does the city need to do?
Well, I guess the big thing that you really will have to do is never forget. You just can't forget that something like this happened. I was so disappointed when they closed the stock exchange, but of course, at some point, you had no choice, you know, when they initially announced it was closing, because you want to just say, the hell with it, you're going forward, nothing's going to change. But
yeah, I think I went a little far.
Okay.
But yeah.
Did you hear what he said?
Yeah, he was pretty blunt about it at the beginning there, yeah.
There wasn't very much remorse or sadness for what had happened. It was more, you know, oh, my buddy Larry Silverstein's buildings aren't the tallest anymore.
No, yeah, that's very much what it sounded like. Yeah. He's like, oh, it became the tallest, and then it was the second tallest. Jeez.
Yeah, which makes you think, is he just that arrogant, or did he also know?
Yeah, no, I think he's just arrogant, honestly. I think we've kind of seen that over the past few years, but, wow, that's funny.
Yeah, so I think my most interesting theory is just that it could have been a directed energy weapon after the airplanes had already hit to bring it down in more than free fall speed, like faster than free fall speed of what it should have been. And it collapsed in on itself in its own shadow rather than one side collapsing at once and the other later, or leaning to one side. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess I have seen some videos of controlled demolitions, though, where the building just kind of falls in on itself. But that was a controlled demolition, right? This is, I mean, as of the official report, this was a building that just kind of fell in on itself, and which I don't know, it doesn't make sense. And I guess one thing that the documentary that I was watching, I can't give a source with this, but it said that these buildings are able to withstand like 4 to 5 times the force that the plane gave, you know, and it's able to withstand a passenger airline flight going into it, which I mean, it makes sense that these buildings are like, they should be required to withstand a lot of force. Another interesting thing that has to like, so there was this fire spray proofing on basically everywhere that had support or that had like foundation, right? They had this fire spray proofing that apparently had gotten knocked off when the building was hit by the plane, which allowed for these steel beams to be melted. Otherwise, that's like so crucial is in order for these steel beams to be weakened, their fireproof seal coating needs to get knocked off, which apparently happened when the plane hit the building. But you have so many reports of people sitting in their offices. They're like 10 stories above or below the impact, and you have these stories of people they don't even realize what happened. You know, they feel the building shake a bit, but it doesn't necessarily sway back and forth. And it doesn't.
Which is interesting too.
Yeah.
Because like when you're driving past someone on the highway and your windows are down, you hear them. You know they just went past you.
You would
think that a jet airliner going that fast, you would at least hear it approaching. Yeah. And then you would connect the dots that something just happened.
That's the. I mean, I guess I don't. And again, I don't have a PhD in anything, right? But it seems so strange that you can be standing in a building and you can feel the impact of this plane. Just barely, but you can feel it. And that plane is dislodged in the building. And the building is now, it's just holding the plane. And somehow that building ends up falling down on itself. Like, it doesn't make, I don't know, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we're going to get to the bottom of the buildings, but I think if we talk about the Pentagon, did you do any research into that one?
What necessarily? I guess there's a lot of, I guess we could start with just the interesting ability of that pilot. Did you look into Yeah.
I listened to that.
He's doing all these strange maneuvers in the plane that apparently only professionals should be able to do. And this guy...
And I've heard that professionals can't even do them most of the time.
Yeah. There were a few simulations, which is also kind of debatable. There's been simulations on both ends of the spectrum where people say, hey, I'm able to do this. And then people are like, hey, no, there's no way I can do this. So I think when you kind of when you look at that, you just kind of have to be like, you both are crazy. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But it's still interesting. They have these flight patterns, and we know this pilot did these strange maneuvers, right? I think he might have circled the Pentagon, and then he did a free fall at one point, but then got the plane back under control. But the strangest part about this to me is if you are looking to do as much damage as possible and you're flying this plane, you're gonna hit the roof of that building. You're gonna try to come straight down as much as possible on that building, or you're gonna that's probably all you're gonna do, honestly. Or you're gonna hit the middle of the building. You're gonna try to get as much as possible. But instead, he gets down to a crazy low altitude. People thought this was a military jet when it passed by. It was an aircraft. It was a commercial airliner that was flying almost 500 miles an hour, probably less than 100 feet above the ground, and it just slams into a building, the side of a wall that had been recently reinforced to withstand airplane, I think it was airplane and even missiles. It had special Kevlar like coating on the wall, so there was very little damage compared to like what actually could have happened. So that, I guess, that is the most interesting part to me, is why is this pilot who supposedly couldn't even solo a single engine jet, he wasn't allowed to fly without somebody in the cockpit with him, which if you're looking to get your license as a pilot or do any sort of flying, I guess that's one of the most basic things to do, is just fly solo. Like, you got to be able to do it yourself. He wasn't even allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. Apparently a few months before, he was trying to solo and go across the Hudson River or something like that. I don't know if you heard about that.
I never heard about that, actually, no.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure. It was in the documentary. I don't know. I can't give proof, but I don't know. There's just these weird inconsistencies again about the pilot, and I guess the weirdest thing for me about the Pentagon is just, why are you not? He obviously was not going for the most damage. I don't know. It's kind of strange, which is kind of crude to say, right? But I don't know.
Yeah.
Also,
if he's able to do all these maneuvers, what is he doing not making the most damage possible? Which is interesting, because the spot where they actually...
The spot where they hit was on the opposite end of where everything important was, too. Like, It didn't even matter if he hit the building on that end. Like, it didn't... Yeah.
Yeah. Did you come across any of the people discussing how there was literally no video of an airplane ever hitting it?
Well, that's another thing that's crazy, is and I'm pretty sure that still holds true today. We still only have one camera angle of any of this happening, right? It's that one, and it comes from like a security gate to the entrance of like a parking lot. And it shows like a side angle of the wall, and you just get about 3 to 5 frames of this white blur slamming into the wall, and then it explodes. And then we're told to believe, and I mean, that totally could have been a plane in my eyes. People debate, then they say it was a missile or whatnot, or it wasn't real. And I mean, I don't know. You have 3 to 5 frames and it's going 500 miles an hour, you're not going to be able to tell what the hell that is. But I just don't know why you don't give us more footage. Like, that's what I don't understand.
It's so hard to believe for me that this guy, who I'm pretty sure, was he one of the ones who was trained at a Air Force Base in Florida?
So I think,
I'm not sure if he was, but I think there was some information I came across that just just implied that he was bottom of his class.
I had heard about that too, and I think I remember hearing about Florida, and there might have been one in Arizona, New Mexico too. But I do remember hearing about that. Every time they mentioned any of these pilots, any of the training that they had received, first of all, their English was horrible. So anytime they had talked to like one of their instructors, they immediately questioned, how is this license even real? He can't speak English. Like, they were just so confused about the whole situation, I guess. But I did hear a lot about that. There was just confusion on how these guys were even able to manage a Boeing 737 or whatever it was in the air at that time. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I
don't know. It's real complicated in so many different ways, but one of the things that is just so fascinating is on September 10th, like the day before, the Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, who you had previously stated was encouraged not to fly commercial and charter flights instead, he actually disclosed that his department was unable to account for roughly like $2.3 trillion worth of transactions.
Dude, dude.
And then no one ever asked about it again.
Yeah.
No one ever asked about it again.
No, that is a huge thing, and that's another thing that just never gets talked about is how is the Pentagon losing trillions of dollars? Like
Yeah.
trillions, which is I guess out of everything, I feel like we should be asking that the most, right? It's like it's one. It's not your money. First, like, and then you lost it. What's going on? But Donald Rumsfeld, he's got some.
He's a shady character.
Oh my goodness! So he acted like a whole passer. He's the Secretary of Defense, right? So his position at the Pentagon during this time should be information gathering and how do we stop this from happening, right? They knew that these planes had been hijacked for over 30 minutes before they hit both towers and the Pentagon. And how is the greatest military in the world not able to send fighter jets to take these down? Like, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
that's one of the biggest things that I guess you could say debunkers, that's what they're trying to answer, right? Is how there was this huge breakdown in the chain of command, and they're basically like, it's just incompetence. They call it the incompetence theory, I guess, where people just were not able to communicate with each other. In certain instances, people were absent or whatever, and we weren't able to send fighter jets out. I think there was also there were like up to 10 different training situations going on at Air Force bases across the United States during 9/11, during this time. And
I heard about that.
Yeah, but what's crazier is instead of calling these jets home or saying, hey, we got to stop all this training, we have an actual like real world situation going on, they just let them train. They continue the training. And there's like this time goes on and just we don't get fighter jets anywhere. There was, I think his name was Richard B. Myers. He was in Colorado in the base there. Oh, I forgot what the base is called. Oh, Ralph Eberhart, that's who it was. He was in charge of NORAD on 9/11. And NORAD is the Northern Command. It was the Air Force Base in Colorado. Like our number one Air Force Base. He was in charge during 9/11. And he was just completely out of touch with any communication that was going on during this time. He was in a meeting and then he left the meeting and took a drive to Mount Cheyenne. I can't remember the reasoning why, but he was just completely out of touch. No one could call him on the phone for over 30 minutes. And it's like 9:30 on 9/11 as the towers are being hit. And he's in command at like the biggest base in the United States, and no one can find him. So, and somehow he keeps his job, which is crazy. Donald Rumsfeld also keeps his job. He's the Secretary of Defense, and it's 10:39. There's a quote I have. He was just gaining situational awareness when he spoke to the vice president at 10:39. That was a quote he gave. It's in the 9/11 Commission report. 10:39 on 9/11, that's when everything was done. The Pentagon had been hit, both towers are down, and you've got a plane in Pennsylvania or whatever, right? So he's gaining situational awareness when everything is done, and he's the Secretary of Defense. That doesn't make sense. Not only does he not lose his job, but then he gets to have the biggest increase of military spending since the Vietnam War, and he gets to pick and choose whatever happens in Afghanistan, and it's just crazy. Like, how does this man keep his job?
Well, just going back to what you were saying about why we didn't send out fighter jets, shoot down the planes, people in the planes are going to die, but we're going to limit the amount of civilian deaths elsewhere, towers, Pentagon, anywhere else. Why didn't that happen? There's a few options. One of them that's probably the most conspiratorial would be there were no planes to shoot down.
Yep. Yeah.
Everything just, there was no planes to shoot down. That's why nothing happened. The other is incompetence, kind of like you were just talking about. Why is this guy talking to? He's being updated on everything that's already happened after it happened. You're the Secretary of Defense. What's your job? Your job is to defend. Your job isn't to go into offensive mode afterwards or just be incompetent the whole time. It's to defend.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Yeah, you're
The
standing.
other point that I want to make is just, I get that George Bush was reading books to kids in Florida, but why is the vice president running Central Command on this?
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah.
And why is he talking to the Secretary of Defense like he's the one with all the information and power? George Bush, the second any information would have come into play, should have been the one who was running point, even if it was through phone calls from a distance, because he's the commander-in-chief.
That is
the
very
vice president
true.
is basically a little secretary for the president on most levels, who handles everything that isn't as important for the president to do, handles perception, doesn't handle the biggest attack on American soil in history.
Yeah, that is a great point. I guess, yeah, why, especially as like a country, why would you want your president to be the one making those decisions too, right? Like that's why he's there. That is strange though. I guess I've never really thought about that. He really was in no position to make any decisions. But I guess no one was, right? There was no one, no decisions were actually made. And it was so weird. There was another guy, his name was Ben Silney, I think. Or no, Lieutenant General Mike Canavan. He was at the FAA headquarters. He was their number one guy at the time. And if they wanted any call to shoot down planes, it had to like go through him first. He was like one of the last guys to give that information before it was given to the president. And this dude was in Puerto Rico and didn't even designate somebody to take his place on 9/11. And instead so there was no one in charge at the FAA at this time. There was no one at the head of the FAA. So then there was this other guy, the guy who I mentioned earlier, I think it's Ben Silney. He was basically gonna be the guy in charge, and it was his like first day on the job. And that was the case with another guy too. It was also his first day on the job, and it was this chain of command that was broken before the day even began. There's a guy in Puerto Rico, and he didn't even give somebody the power to make decisions. And then you have two guys who it's their first day on the job. And then you have the other guy in Colorado who's driving to Mount Cheyenne and no one can talk to him. And it's just like, so all these people who are supposedly supposed to be in charge of the nation's defense is just not accessible. No one can talk to them. And the president's reading books to children in Florida. Yeah, like what is going on? How are all these things perfectly landing on today? Like,
and you know what this kind of brings up?
What's that?
You have two options. Either the government is so unprepared and incompetent to handle the most important situations that they could possibly have, or there was a liability shield for all these people. Like, say, let's go through the list. Donald Rumsfeld didn't know any information until after it happened.
Yep.
The vice president, who it shouldn't have been his responsibilities, is running point. George Bush had no information and wasn't running point, didn't have any power to stop the situation. The leader of the FAA, who had the power to shut down all of these planes.
He's in Puerto Rico.
The other guy is his first day. Another department, first day. No one has liability here. It's a shield. So this could point towards, because they could have made the plan or allowed this to happen and then used all of these discrepancies and, honest mistakes.
It's the incompetence
as
excuse.
A shield for any responsibility that would have had to have been taken, losing your jobs, being sued, going to prison, all of these different things.
Yeah, that is a good point. I mean, you could take this two ways, right? You can go all the way in and say, yeah, they knew this was happening and that was their excuse to get out of getting in trouble, right? Or you could just say, hey, they really were incompetent and they had no sort of communication with each other. And it just so happened that all of these factors, there's new people, there's no people, it just so happened that they all happened at once, and it was just the worst possible time. Like, I could totally see that happening too. But then it's also like, hey, there were still zero jets that were in the air until after this all happened. Like, hey, we eventually got jets over there. Like, they got there, but it was an hour and a half, 2 hours too late, which it just does not make sense for the United States military. Like, I feel like it just doesn't matter. I don't know. It's just that doesn't make sense to me. Is how do you not get any fighter jets in the air? I feel like if you're in any sort of military developed country, that is extremely possible to happen. Like, it's almost it's not even like it's an expectation. Like, you should be able to have fighter jets within different states within 20 minutes. Like, that shouldn't even be a question. And as like, if you're a citizen of the United States, that should worry you. It doesn't matter if it's because they're fucking dumb, or if it's because they just have different motives and they want these things to happen. It should scare you. Like, this should not happen to our country. The way that our country is presented to ourselves and the way it's presented to the world is things like 9/11 just should not happen. But I don't know, it did. So,
well, at what point do you just consider there's too many things and too many people who got lucky and never had to take responsibility for their failures?
There's so many.
Lucky Larry Silverstein.
Yeah, I like
Donald
that.
Rumsfeld, George Bush, Dick Cheney, all these people. And this is where I start to get a little bit more into my mind of who, if we're actually going to make a commitment to the fact that there were people who allowed it to happen or planned it. Because I'm not on the level of any of this was planned for the most part.
I agree with you.
I think there's a part of me that thinks, yes, this could have been planned within the government, within certain high-level wealthy citizens like Larry Silverstein who had something to gain.
Yeah.
And then there's another part of it where the government especially could have just been incompetent or unprepared to handle these situations, or then saw what was happening and allowed it to happen. Because it's really tough for me, even knowing some of the other conspiracies, to just consider the fact that so many people died, and then their families' lives changed forever. And even some of the people who survived got mesothelioma, other lung problems on ground zero.
Yeah.
Do I really think that these people were okay with that? Because then you have to think, what was there to gain for them personally?
Exactly.
And there is certain connections that you can make, like Dick Cheney, former CEO of Halliburton, then gives them one of the biggest war contracts in history once we go into Afghanistan and Iraq. George Bush needed to lower gas prices, all these things, boost the economy. A war is always going to boost the economy, the stock market, all those things. I'm still at the point where once 9/11 happened, that's when they started taking advantage of what happened.
Yeah,
The Department of Homeland Security never existed before this.
Yes.
And after that, there was a lot of criticism and frustration from the citizens. The Patriot Act.
I was just going to say, Patriot Act. Yep. Yeah.
People were perceiving their freedoms being taken away, and I think legitimately, like, these attacks allegedly came from 19 foreign citizens from different countries. And then we have the Department of Homeland Security, which mainly, rather than even going after people who would fit the descriptions of the people who hijacked the planes, they start going after U.S. citizens or, certain groups that they deem to be a threat, regardless of whether they truly are. And then the Patriot Act starts allowing the government to spy on its own citizens. This attack was carried out allegedly by 19 members of different countries who came into our country, were trained at our Air Force bases, overtook these planes, and then 9/11 happened. What happens after that? We get the Department of Homeland Security, we get the Patriot Act, and we get two wars in two different countries than every single member that hijacked the airplane.
Yeah, Iraq and
which
Afghanistan.
is crazy.
Yeah, and they're all
And
Saudis.
I understand not going to war with Saudi Arabia because they uphold the U.S. dollar like no other country does through the petrodollar, which was set up. So when Saudi Arabia drills oil and sells it, they're only taking transactions in U.S. dollars, which boosts the value of our money. So I'm not criticizing them for not going to war with Saudi Arabia. What my criticism is why are we going to Iraq? Why are we going to Afghanistan? And then after we're there, why does their oil output and their opium output go up more and more every year that we're there?
Yeah.
While repeatedly news articles in the United States are saying that's what we're there to stop.
Yeah. No, and then we got like opium issues in the country. There's hundreds of thousands of people who are addicted to pills in this country. It's like, what are we doing?
Did you see what I put in there? There should be a graph that I have. It doesn't say that it's a graph. I believe it says it should be. It says opioid graph.
Oh yeah.
It's just like two numbers.
Yep.
If you click on that, you'll see that the opioid.
Oh yeah, look at
I believe
this.
that one is. Yep. So if you look at it, we got into those countries in about 2002. Probably started ramping everything up around 2003.
Yep.
The United States didn't really have a really strong opioid problem until after that.
Right.
And even after the illegal opioids were shipped into our country and people started overdosing, they also started using synthetic opiates for painkillers and other things like that,
Right.
like Oxy, all of these other prescribed drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
look
there
at
a
that.
correlation here that a lot of people aren't seeing? Because I think most people don't really comprehend why we were in those countries in the first place, and now they understand that we should have never been there.
Right.
But until you realize that there's dots that need to be connected, you'll probably never understand why it's such a big deal that 9/11 either happened or was allowed to happen.
Yeah.
Because without it, none of these things would have been allowed to happen either.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what is it all about?
Money.
Money.
Yep. 100%. I think, and I was just gonna say that's what it ends up being. Like, why are we sourcing opium from out over there and then bringing it here? It's like, we just need the money. Gotta fund things. Gotta improve American society with drugs and yeah. Well, another crazy thing that I love is like they've got mass weapons of destruction, right? And also how many members of Al Qaeda even were there? They're like less than 1,000 maybe. And I think we got rid of literally all of Al Qaeda and then the Taliban within a few months, and we're there in Afghanistan for 20 years. Like, come on, guys. What are we doing? These things just don't add up. Like,
and there's actually videos put out by one of the top reporters from Fox News back when we were like really into these wars of U.S. troops guarding the opium fields.
Yep. Yeah.
Them.
I remember. I think I watched that in high school. We were in Chuck Oliver's class, and I'm pretty sure we're watching videos of like U.S. troops walking through opium fields. It's just like, what is this? It's crazy.
Because actually, if you look into it a little bit more, the story in about 2003 was that the U.S. was there to stop the opium production. Mm-hmm. But the Taliban actually outlawed opium production in 2001.
Interesting.
Which is crazy. But what you have to remember at the end of the day is, despite the fact that we got rid of these, say, 1,000 members of Al-Qaeda, because we're there in their country, bombing, shooting, patrolling their streets, you're radicalizing more and more people by the day that would have been impartial or ignorant to everything going on if it was a diplomatic disagreement.
There are probably
immediately.
Yeah, there are probably more people that hate the United States now than when they did in 2001. Like, That's very true. Like, we are over there and we're just facilitating the people who are the people who supposedly did this to us. We're antagonizing them almost. We go into their countries and then we steal their resources, and we also try to change, we try to democratize them and, bring all our American ideals over there. And it's just not going to work. Like, there's no chance.
It's not.
No, like they literally have their religious morals are so far, I guess you could say right leaning or what. They're just not going to change. I don't even know if they're right leaning. They're like, I don't even know.
Traditional would probably be the best word to describe it, because most right wingers in America are nowhere near as traditional as those people.
They're like, they're just, I don't know. But it's also like, it's when we went into it, there were such, I don't think it was as big as of a deal that we made it out to be, Like, sure, there were terrorists in the world, but I don't know, but I guess you could say they were. They took down 2 towers, so whatever. It's crazy.
Yeah. 3,000 people in New York City translated into about 1 million Middle Eastern citizens throughout the last 20 years.
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Like, sure, we got rid of all those terrorists, but we also got rid of a lot of their families and their children. And, a lot of innocent people died from Bush and Obama simply because of drones, and they're bombing wedding ceremonies. And, it's like, what are we doing?
And then they get a Nobel Peace Prize.
Exactly. Yeah. Except, we've got like teenagers who are practically playing video games. They've got a headset on and they're flying drones halfway across the world. And they're so desensitized to this stuff too. So it's like, sure, you're dropping bombs on innocent, children and whatnot, but it looks like it's a video game. So it's probably not reality. And even if it is reality, these are the bad people and they're against us and they don't believe in what we believe in. So therefore they must die. Like, that's kind of what we come down to. And it's just really sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the entire thing. The way that wars, I guess you could say, progressed throughout the years. Now most of our attacks are through drones and killings where you don't have to, like most people, when you're on the ground in the Middle East and you're in a real war scenario and something happens where you have to shoot someone, you have to go personally check your kill.
Yeah, face to
face. And that's where PTSD comes from.
Yeah.
But when you're just sitting in a little office thousands of miles away, and as long as your connection is good, you can hit your target.
Yeah.
You have no emotional connection.
No, literally, it is a video game. And they've been playing COD and whatnot. Like they're used to it, and I'm pretty sure I was reading like articles and whatnot of they're recruiting a lot of kids that are like just good at video games, right? I had a professor in one of my classes. He said, you know how you'd always have like you'd have someone from the Army come to the high school and they've set up like a table or whatever. Apparently they had like a trailer that they set up in the parking lot, and they just have a bunch of TVs where the kids will just play COD and video games, but it's all for the Army. So they've got all these kids playing video games, but it's just recruitment for the Army. And it's like, this is kind of getting ridiculous. Like,
wow.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of just wild.
That's crazy.
But yeah, I don't know. I think this was we've gotten about an hour and 7 minutes in, so it's a pretty good conversation so far. Is there anything else you want to add? I think I kind of went through everything.
Yeah, I just think at the end of the day, you have to think a little bit deeper about it, and you can either come to terms with the fact that you genuinely believe the mainstream story. The other option is you can see that there were events that transpired and inconsistencies that took place, but at the end of the day, maybe the government just used the events of 9/11 to further their own interests in the Middle East and in the United States. Or you can say that the entire thing was planned. And I'm not willing to make a statement on any of them, except for that I don't believe the exact mainstream story that was taught to me, and that's okay.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you there. I don't think I necessarily agree 100% with what I'm told, But I also think I would just need more clarification. Like there's so many questions that have been unanswered, and I doubt we'll get an answer. There's a lot of just government documents too. The 9/11 Commission report, it's a summary of what they found. It's not even everything that they have, and there's documents that they haven't shown us, and they probably won't show us. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, you're sitting duck in. You're just kind of waiting for more things to happen. And I guess I agree. I mean, I don't believe that like the official story, but I also could believe it, I guess. I just need more information because I feel like we're just not being told the full story, and we probably won't be told the full story, maybe ever, but if so, it's not going to be for another 20 years before at least all these people are dead. So.
And even if we are told the real story, no one is going to recognize it as the real story anyway, because John F. Kennedy was shot in 1963, and we still haven't gotten the entire documents released about it.
Right,
so
that's very
I don't
true.
think we'll ever get the main story, even as they say it, released, much less the real story itself.
Yeah.
So at this point, it's just interesting to run down some rabbit holes and discover some things that you would have never discovered if you weren't looking.
No, yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, you get kind of like an insight on possibilities that might happen when you kind of just open your mind to things that sound ridiculous. It is ridiculous at times, right? But also, I don't know, it gives you a different perspective on things. And that's definitely important especially when you're talking about things like 9/11. You gotta take all things into consideration. You should have an open mind to things, and I don't know. I'm glad we're doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about that next, JFK. Kinda. Well.
Yeah.
I feel like
I'm
that'd
gonna
be
have
an
to do a little
interesting
bit more research into it, but I'll give you some other stuff. Like there's one that I've heard. There's some stuff about General Patton from World War II and how he died and how the mainstream story, or even like Bill O'Reilly wrote a book about it.
I read that, Killing Patton.
Are we really gonna trust Bill O'Reilly?
Dude, I read that one, and I also read his on JFK, and no shit, he inserts himself in the story of he somehow puts him on the doorstep of like a reporter a few days after. I don't even remember. I'll send it to you if I find it. But it's so funny. Like Bill O'Reilly's writing this book, and of course he has to put himself in the story. It's like, come on, bro. What is this? Like, he's just trying to sell a book and make money at this point. He wrote Killing Jesus too. Like, I don't know. Yeah. But yeah,
right,
this was good. Yeah, I think I'll let you know when I post and whatnot, and yeah, we'll have to come up with some ideas for the next few episodes. But JFK will definitely be a good one for sure.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good start.
Cool. Yeah. I'll just let you know when I post and whatnot, and we'll get back into it later on. So. Hopefully we have thousands of viewers that are listening to us, Maybe we can get some sponsorships and start paying for some rent or whatever. I don't know. So
maybe Joe Rogan will let us on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That'd be Could you imagine? Yeah, Joe, 9/11 was fake. Really, guys?
Do you want to try my pills? What about DMT, bro?
Yeah. No, we should go. We gotta go on Infowars. We gotta go on the Alex Jones show. That'd
be lit.
We should try calling in or something like that. That thing.
We could definitely get. I've tried calling in before, and there's definitely people that do and can actually get through.
Jeez, those people have to be insane.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, sounds good. It was good to talk to you. We'll have to meet back and continue to do this. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. See ya.